Hi, this video looks at joint ventures as a method of growth, and it's one of the methods of growth that you need to know. So a joint venture occurs when two or more businesses create a subsidiary company of which ownership and the associated risks and rewards are shared. So a joint venture is where two or more companies, it can be more than two, but it's generally two companies come together and they create a new business. It's an entirely new business, and the ownership tends to be split 50-50 between those two companies. And there are a number of reasons for doing that, which we'll look at in a minute. But I'll give you some examples first, which might highlight the reasons that businesses do it. So the first example is one that I've talked about before. The Chinese automaker Chery and Jaguar Land Rover. Now, Jaguar Land Rover were separate companies that either merged, I think they must have merged, or one of them took over the other, to create one company called Jaguar Land Rover. And Jaguar Land Rover wanted to move into the Chinese market. Chery Automobiles have a knowledge of the Chinese market, and so they came together, built a new factory under the joint venture, the name Chery Jaguar Land Rover. And what this allows Jaguar Land Rover to do is access Chery's knowledge of the Chinese consumer and the Chinese market and their distribution networks and Chinese culture and how business is done there. And actually, you can't enter the Chinese market unless you have a Chinese owner on your board. And Chery had all that knowledge, but they wanted access to Jaguar Land Rover's knowledge of engines and building cars, because Jaguar Land Rover build excellent cars. So by coming together and forming this joint venture, yes, Jaguar Land Rover were able to enter the Chinese market, but they were also able to access Chery's knowledge of that market and how it works, whereas Chery got the benefits of working with Jaguar Land Rover and access to that expertise. So one reason for doing a joint venture is to enable a company to enter a new market, particularly maybe in China or India, where there are restrictions placed over the ownership. And in many countries, you need to have local owners of the company in order to operate there. Nokia Siemens Networks is an organisation that obviously was developed by both Nokia, the Finnish telecommunications company, and Siemens, the telecommunications company, and they produce kind of hardware used in sort of internet networks, networking within businesses, and they came together in order to share expertise and to compete better within that market. And finally, Sony Ericsson. Ericsson was a mobile phone company. Sony, obviously the huge electronics manufacturer from Japan, and they came together and made a very successful joint venture phone company. But actually Sony have now bought that outright. They bought Ericsson out of that joint venture, and now Sony own the company 100%, and it's become Sony Mobile Communications. But what that allowed Sony to do was, over the years that they worked with Ericsson, they gained knowledge of how mobile phones worked. They gained skills. They did lots of joint learning together, and now Sony bought Ericsson out of that. Ericsson benefited financially, and Sony have got the ownership of the I think it's called Sony Mobile now. So, what are the advantages of joint mergers? Well, joint mergers allow companies to benefit from synergies such as market knowledge, design expertise, distribution networks, market research, knowledge of how a local market works. These are important reasons for going into joint ventures. Someone else can do something that you can't, so you go and work with them. This will reduce the risk associated with expansion into unknown markets, for example, or just simply allow an organisation to enter a market, particularly when there's legal regulations around who can own the companies there. And another advantage is that you might be able to use the skills, the technology, the knowledge acquired from working with another company in the parent company. So, employees may come back to the parent company and say, look, we could use this skill, or we can utilise this technology in our existing product, which benefits the company from as a result of working with a partner. However, obviously we're going to need to share profits, that should probably say, rather than revenues, but the profits should be split 50-50. It can be difficult to combine organisational cultures. We talked about this in the bit on mergers and takeovers. It can be very difficult for two companies that are used to operating in their own way to come together and operate together. Of course, there can be the risk of conflict between the partners, as in any partnership. There might be different objectives or changing objectives. They go in thinking that the partnership will lead to one thing, and then one company's kind of changed its strategy. It wants something else out of the partnership, and that might not always be shared. So there can be the risk of conflict, changing objectives. And another thing is that it's all very well saying, well, we might gain skills and knowledge from working with another company, but equally you might lose a source of competitive advantage as a result of the joint venture. Cherry might tell Jaguar Land Rover something that they can then use to compete against Cherry if Cherry were operating in an overseas market against Jaguar Land Rover. So joint ventures have many advantages and disadvantages that you need to be aware of in case a question comes up on it.